Let's go.
Welcome to the MBA and Executive Education Masterclass series. Today we're talking to Dr. Michelle Shields, who has over 30 years of business and consulting experience in learning and development. In fact, she was the 2023 L&D Consultant of the Year as awarded by the New Zealand Association of Training and Development. So, Michelle, talk to us a little bit about the work that you do and the companies that you've worked with.
Oh, thanks, Elsa Marie. It's great to be here. So I've been in New Zealand now for 22 years, and prior to that, as you can tell perhaps from my accent, I'm from America. In America, I worked largely with the telecommunications industry there and some of the digital technology firms like IBM, Telecom, Nortel Networks, Bell Northern Research. I've had a long interest in research and development, so when I came to New Zealand, I've had opportunities to work with Ag Research and one of the Crown Research Institutes, and I've worked with, most recently, with the Orion Group, but in between there, had stints with Telecom New Zealand and quite a bit of work with the healthcare industry. I was a manager of services at Canterbury Health Laboratories and worked with several projects for people and capability with former Canterbury District Health Board. Most of my work has been with adult learners in strategy for people and human resources, and I consider myself somewhat of a gig worker, so I've been working as an independent consultant contractor for over 10 years now with a company called Fulcrum Associates.
Amazing. And just like us, you're passionate about developing leaders.
Yes.
But what we're going to talk to you about today is employee engagement.
Yes.
Now, I know that everybody hearing that term thinks that they know exactly what
Yes.
it's about and what it means, and it's kind of a box-ticking exercise.
Yes.
But you're going to tell us a lot more about why it's important and how
Yes.
this field has changed.
Exactly. So employee engagement, as you said, most people believe they know what it is, but what probably is a hallmark for employee engagement is asking a consistent set of questions over several years to understand trends in your culture, trends in their leadership effectiveness, trends in your employee morale, trends in how employees think about the organization. So typically these 5 questions, there's usually 5, relate to things like, would I recommend this as an organization to others? Am I satisfied with my job? Would I think about leaving the organization? And other questions such as, do you see yourself working here in a couple of years' time? Which has been kind of interesting because we've been measuring some of these things for over a decade now. And one of the most well-known organizations that has measured employee engagement has been the Gallup organization. And we're fortunate that they provide feedback on a yearly basis on the Asia Pacific region. So we're able to get some really good metrics on how New Zealand stacks up compared to the rest of the world. Wow. So if you think about some of those questions, what do you think we're best at? Would you say that we would recommend the organization, that we're motivated to go the extra mile, that you're proud of the company you work for, that you rarely think about looking for a job elsewhere, or you see yourself working here in 2 years' time? Is there one that you think New Zealand as a country would be the best at?
Yeah, I think proud.
Yes, you're absolutely
Yes.
right. That's the one that we really
Excel at.
excel at. We
Wow.
do. Yeah. Any thoughts on what we might not be as good at?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, actually, the results that have come out from both the Gallup organization and Culture Amp, which I'll share with you later in some of the historical evolution of engagement, have identified that it's, I rarely think about leaving the organization for another job. And actually, if you combine that with where do I want to be in a couple of years' time, about a third of our employees view those questions as strongly agree which is one of the key reasons why engagement is so important and continues to be important, is that it has a lot to say about tenure in an organization and potential turnover, and particularly if you are in a tight market like we are here in New Zealand, will your high performers stay with you? So it's quite important to industry in terms of its impact on the business.
Wow. Okay. So that's definitely my next question. What is the overall impact of employee engagement, but also maybe what are some of those global trends that you're seeing that's being reflected across the board, not just in New Zealand?
Yes. Well, that's it's been an interesting history, because we have often assumed that engagement does have an impact on not only employee morale and how employees think about leadership, but on business performance. But in fact, it's been quite a controversial topic as to whether employee engagement actually leads to productivity. So Microsoft took it upon themselves and came up with an index last year in 2023 that looked specifically at the impact of engagement on performance of the corporation. And what they found is that highly engaged organizations outperformed in the Standard & Poor Index, whereas highly disengaged organizations underperformed the index. So there's definitely a strong correlation there to the bottom line.
Amazing.
And then in terms of some of the trends that we're seeing, obviously, we've come through the pandemic, and the pandemic has had a big impact on how people think about work, and particularly in the area of the degree to which employees identify with their work, and particularly now that we're seeing some of the younger generation coming through. It used to be that where you worked, who you worked for, and what your job title was very self-defining. So it's come as a bit of a shock to some managers internationally that some of our younger workers don't have that same ethos. And so that's been kind of an international trend. The other thing that's been an international trend is that after the pandemic, we were concerned about well-being, and in fact a lot of organizations began to implement well-being programs to address employee response to the pandemic. And what we've discovered, in particular here in New Zealand, but globally as well, is that resilience, in particular here in New Zealand, that we have quite a high level of resilience and the ability to bounce back. But what has continued to be a trend both here in New Zealand and internationally is the level of daily stress that employees experience. And so when they ask questions like, how much do you agree with the statement, I have experienced extreme stress in the last day, that has been quite a high result, with over 60% saying that they have. And so that continues to be a concern.
Wow. Well, I think that there's a risk here, and that is that managers and leaders and organizations just say, like, this is a global trend. Yes, our engagement has dipped, but it really doesn't matter. This is just what the market looks like at the moment.
Yes.
So what do you say to that? Are there organizations that are kind of backing that trend, and what are they doing well?
What are they doing well?
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing, and if I could just maybe put a little bit of historical context onto engagement, and it'll help see where kind of things are going, but also what some organizations are doing in response. So when I first started working in this field about 15 years ago, here in New Zealand, there were companies like Connexa that organizations would engage with, and they would come in and use your employee database to administer questionnaires about engagement. And so it was all very externally driven. And Connexa merged with IBM in 2012, and that was quite a mega takeover, if you will. They paid $1.3 billion for Connexa, which for a New Zealand company, that was quite good. And then, unfortunately, they exited the New Zealand market in 2018, leaving a lot of employers sort of wondering what they were going to do next. We have continued to see a number of organizations here in New Zealand, like Workday, as well as Aon Hewitt, who have really filled that gap, including a firm that came out of New Zealand called Ask Your Team. So over the last decade, we've seen still a lot of externally driven engagement studies. However, in the last sort of 5 years, a new entrant into the market called Culture Amp Amp has really put the power of understanding the pulse of the organization in the hands of the organization itself. And while Culture Amp holds about 6% of the market, what they have brought to organizations is the ability to survey their employees as they want to, when they want to, how they want to. And so this has meant that we're seeing more real-time data collection. So some of the things that we're seeing, in fact, one of our local organizations, St. John, uses what Microsoft would call a flywheel approach. And what I mean by that is it's much more two-way. So at an organization like St. John, they'll survey their employees, some of them every 2 weeks, some of them every month, some of them every 3 months. And it's a more two-way interaction, so managers have an opportunity to comment on concerns that employees are raising, so that there's a more real-time active listening. So what we're really seeing is not just a survey respond, but a listening kind of approach to employee engagement.
It sounds like it's so much more proactive versus that reactive, oh, look at how bad our numbers are, or how good our numbers are, versus let's actually do something about it real time.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's been very much more of a dialogue and more real time.
So talk a little bit more about some of these new developments that is kind of steering clear of that historical context.
Well, in addition to the do-it-yourself kind of approach, some of the more cutting-edge things are some biometrician kind of monitoring, whereby organizations have the ability to sort of monitor heart rate and stress levels real time, and it leads to more direct biofeedback, if you will. Obviously, in terms of lifting engagement, we've seen a bit of gamification whereby employees are encouraged to challenge themselves. Think about the walk the length of New Zealand pedometer challenges that we've had. So, in order to lift engagement, they got everybody involved. They allowed people to control the amount of walking they did, and it became more about connecting with others in the organization, which had a big, strong impact on employee engagement in general.
Well, that's really interesting, and we'll get back to employee engagement, but it sounds like the employee engagement issue is very closely linked to a culture issue.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. So if you think about the role of the leader, and we'll talk a bit more about that, but the role of the leader, which really contributes to the employee engagement, and employee engagement over time will be a reflection of the culture that organizations have developed. It's those habits and that long lived experience of what it's like to work here on a day-to-day basis that becomes culture.
Wow. That's really powerful. So let's talk about that role of the leader.
Yes.
So you listed some really interesting questions that had the greatest impact on employee engagement.
Yes. And some of those questions from the most recent Culture Amp results. So Culture Amp does a monitoring of New Zealand so that we're able to get New Zealand specific data. And they looked at 300 companies here in New Zealand. And 3 of the most driving items on the survey were things like, I have confidence in the leadership here. I feel like the leaders demonstrate the importance of people in our organization, and the leader effectively communicates a vision that motivates me. So all of those are the 3 most critical elements in the results that Culture Amp did across those 300 companies, and all of them relate to leadership.
Wow. We don't leave organizations, we leave managers, right?
Well, and it's interesting that you would say that, because again, I'm not trying to encourage one company over another, but Gallup found that 70% of the engagement results that an organization can observe is due to the relationship with the manager, with one's manager.
That makes a very, very compelling case.
It does, yes.
For leadership development,
yes.
Really it does, because often we see people, emerge into leadership roles. They were specialists. Now all of a sudden, then they excelled as specialists. Now they become managers, then there's this whole slew of skills that they need to know, and employee engagement is just one of them, and how to go about doing it. Really interesting.
And it's really actually very simple, because it's about the relationship, and it's about the relationship that you have with people. The number of managers who say to me, why do I need to have a one-to-one with my employee? I see them every day.
Wow.
But it's not just the, standing by someone's desk telling them what you did over the weekend. It's really sort of monitoring on a regular basis how their workload is going, how they're feeling in terms of their mental well-being, what their challenges are. Are they feeling like they're developing? Are they using their strengths? So that relationship that the employee has with their manager is quite critical to how employees think about their employer and whether they're likely to stay.
Well, let's then look on the flip side of that. So if good relationships lead to good engagement, employee engagement, I know it's not the only thing, but certainly key to that. What does kind of bad engagement look like?
Yeah, well, bad engagement, it's interesting because McKinsey just came out with a report that looked at different types of engagement. And it's interesting because typically we tend to think about favorable, neutral, and disengaged, or unfavorable. And typically, sort of three pots of people. But disengaged employees can fall into the quiet quitters. They can fall into the doing the minimum amount required to get by. And then we have some very vocal disengaged people who can have a big impact on those who are there. Another type of employee, and now we're moving toward the engaged part, are our solid citizens, which comprise for most organizations at least a third or more. Our solid citizens, they do the job that they're expected to do, and they're rewarded for it. And then we have some who McKinsey has termed the double dippers, which these are employees who do a great job, but they may have one or more positions that they're holding simultaneously. And then we have about 4 to 6% of people who are high performers who really account for a great deal of not only performance, but they have an impact on others and have a contagion about their engagement that affects others.
I think that word contagion is really, really interesting if you think about kind of that era of that emotional contagion. And if you have those really negative, vocally negative employees, what an influence they have on the teams around them.
Exactly.
Same with the positive.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we've noticed in some of the consistent results over the last couple of years. I've been involved in about 5 different engagement studies. And one of the things that we see almost every time is that are we dealing with poor performance? Well, the reality is that oftentimes we really don't know, because things might be happening that the employees at large are not aware of. However, what they do know is whether the behavior has changed or whether it remains. And of course, that perceived fairness as to what's acceptable and what isn't can have a real toxic effect on the work team itself. Some of the other things we've seen just in New Zealand in the last couple of years that you can almost hang your hat on, our senior leadership levels tend to be the most engaged. And whether that's, my theory about that is that it's because they have the most control over their work and the most influence over decisions. So that comes as no surprise to me. But the other one that I'm seeing more than I have in years previous is the emphasis on collaboration. And oftentimes what we observe is that within the team itself, collaboration is quite high, and people work together and are almost unified as a cohesive cohort. But it's that cross-group collaboration that consistently I'm seeing is not as good. And of course that can contribute to people feeling like they don't understand quite what their role is. There's lapses in communication, which for an employee who might be quite purpose-driven, as you would find, say, in healthcare, this can be extremely frustrating because their job is to serve their patients, or if it's a counsel, the citizenry. And if they're not able to do that with a level of self-satisfaction because they can't get the information when they need it, that can lead to high levels of stress, as we mentioned at the beginning, when they're not able to deliver as they would like to.
Well, it's so interesting you mentioned this kind of cross-silo communication and engagement, because if you think about all the other business outcomes that you want, that's critical for digital transformation. If you're rolling out a big digital transformation project, it's critical for innovation and kind of cultivating innovation within the organization, to name but a few. But it's so interesting to me is that maybe this employee engagement could be an early signal.
Yes.
That maybe your organization just isn't ready to roll out those big initiatives.
Yes.
Because there's really a breakdown of, the employees' engagement and this cross-silo communication.
Yes, absolutely. And quite often organizations are using their engagement studies as sort of monitors of readiness for change.
Interesting.
And as a monitor of the health of the organization overall. So one of the things we're seeing more, and this sort of comes out of some of the larger companies in the U.S., is it's not about engagement, it's about thriving. And it's about people's ability to feel like they have self-determination. And by that I mean that ability to work autonomously, to feel like they can demonstrate mastery of the skills that they have, and a feeling of relatedness or connection to the organization. So more and more we're seeing that organizational health isn't just engagement, but it's thriving. Are our people thriving? And of course through change, that does take quite a bit of a hit. And so some of the things that we're seeing, and in fact, when I think about the results post-pandemic, it should come as no surprise that employees continue to be highly stressed.
Yeah.
I can't think of any time in history when we have asked people to change as many behaviors over a short period of time as that. Everything from hand washing to distancing to mask wearing. Was it any surprise that people felt quite despairing at points?
Yes, and now with an economic downturn, people are stressed about other things, right?
Yes, so so it really preoccupies people's ability to take on more and more change, but that's actually what we really need to be doing. So it's really about thinking, how do we do this in a way that one, we assess readiness, and two, we continue to maintain levels of healthy mental well-being and team performance through the change.
Well, you've just convinced me to add another tool to the arsenal of digital transformations, because we measure digital maturity and kind of digital readiness where that's concerned, but there's always this cultural element to it as well, and are employees ready? And you never really know, so other than the overall strategy, how ready are we in terms of our infrastructure capabilities and vision? How ready are our employees?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And of course, if at the beginning, change comes in different shapes and sizes, everything from incremental, tools at your desktop to transformational hearts and minds. And the more your change is going to involve a change in behavior for people, and then particularly if it's going to mean a change in the way they think about their work, you've got to place a greater emphasis on people's readiness. So some of the tools in change management have enabled us to look at that, and are people ready?
Well, this is great, right? So we know that this is important. I'm certainly convinced, and I hope all our listeners are as well. But what do we do as leaders? What are some practical strategies that we can implement?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's really what it gets down to at the end of the day. All the theory and the big studies, they only take you so far, and that's where it's become quite interesting in terms of where we are with some of the measurements, because a lot of the results we see look at engagement at an organizational level, but engagement happens at an individual level. And it happens through the leader and the leader's relationships. So things that, the number one thing that I would recommend if leaders aren't doing it is the one-to-one. Because the one-to-one, and I know a lot of people will say, but I see them every day, but it doesn't allow you to ask questions about how are they really. So the one-to-one is an opportunity to talk about the workload, talk about the well-being, talk about the strengths. Are they having an opportunity to use their strengths every day? And you can find out about people's strengths in a very simple way, simply by asking things like, when you're in the flow and you lose track of time, what are you doing? Well, there have been studies that have shown in healthcare that if we're able to use our strengths even one day a week, that can offset the incidence of burnout. So, being able to know what your employees really enjoy and how you can bring more of those tasks into their work is one way. And then certainly, to provide those development conversations, and that's where I'm seeing a lot more interest in organizations at the moment, is helping their leaders be better at the development conversations. Because it's not just, saying, well, what do you want to do? It's being able to align the organizational direction with the individual strengths, with the individual's aspirations, and finding that sweet spot where the three things overlap so that it's a win-win for both the organization and the individual.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for giving us a really evidence-based approach to this, for updating us on this field, and for giving us some practical tools that we can take away with us.